Hello there! Welcome to this presentation on the honor of the crown. When first hearing the expression, the honor of the crown, some people might think that it is a quaint kind of diplomatic courtesy, something like noblesse oblige for government officials. Far from it. The honor of the crown is actually a constitutional principle that requires the Government of Canada and provincial governments, when acting on behalf of the crown, to behave with integrity, fairness, and good faith in all dealings with Indigenous peoples. It is not symbolic, nor a mere courtesy. It is a legal standard that shapes how courts interpret treaties, legislation, and crown conduct with regards to First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous peoples. Here is a quick rundown of the core elements of this constitutional principle. Number 1, the Crown must act honorably at all times. This is the foundational rule. Whenever the Crown interacts with Indigenous peoples, like negotiating treaties, implementing them, consulting on resource projects, it must act in a way that upholds its honor. It must act honorably. Number 2, treaties must be interpreted generously and in favor of Indigenous peoples. Because treaties were often negotiated in unequal circumstances, the honor of the Crown requires courts to resolve ambiguities in favor of Indigenous signatories, to consider Indigenous perspectives, and to avoid narrow or technical interpretations. Treaties must be interpreted generously and in favor of Indigenous peoples. Number 3, the Crown must diligently fulfill treaty promises. Once the Crown makes a treaty promise, it must implement it, not delay, not frustrate the purpose of the treaty, but fulfill it diligently. Number 4, the duty to consult and accommodate. When the Crown contemplates actions that might affect Indigenous rights, the honor of the Crown requires meaningful consultation, and the Crown must then make accommodations where appropriate. Number 5, the Crown must avoid sharp dealing. The Crown cannot exploit technicalities, loopholes, or power imbalances. This phrase, sharp dealing, comes directly from a Supreme Court decision in 1996. So why does this matter? It matters because the honor of the Crown is the backbone of treaty interpretation, the duty to consult, modern land claims, fiduciary obligations, and reconciliation as a constitutional imperative. Although the honor of the Crown is not a law but a principle which is debated by the legal profession, as a legal standard it still has teeth and has been positively applied in several cases where the Supreme Court of Canada has found in favor of First Nations, Métis, or Indigenous people. Here are some examples. It ensures that the Crown's historical and ongoing relationship with Indigenous peoples is governed by fairness, respect, and constitutional responsibility, not just political discretion or expediency. In a nutshell, the honor of the Crown means the government must act with integrity, fairness, and good faith toward Indigenous peoples, and must diligently uphold its treaty and constitutional obligations. This could leave a naive observer to believe that the honor of the Crown always motivates the government to act ethically or honorably. However, the history of so many findings by the Supreme Court of Canada against the government and in favor of First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous peoples suggests otherwise. That the government sails as close to the wind as possible and is being dragged kicking and screaming by court challenges from Indigenous peoples to act ethically and honorably. The sad reality is that the high cost of litigation ensures that the guardrail only works for those First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous peoples with sufficient funds to be in a position to make legal challenges all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, always with costs in the millions of dollars. That's all very well, but what does this mean for ordinary Canadians? The honor of the Crown is not an abstract doctrine that only affects governments and Indigenous nations. It quietly shapes the legal, moral, and political landscape that every Canadian lives in. Firstly, it shapes the country we live in. The honor of the Crown is the legal principle that requires the Canadian state to act with integrity, fairness, and good faith in all dealings with Indigenous peoples. That principle influences how land is managed, affects how governments consult communities, shapes environmental approvals, guides treaty implementation, and affects policing, child welfare, and resource development. Even if you never interact with the courts, we live in a country whose institutions are constrained by this duty. In short, it's part of the constitutional architecture of Canada. Secondly, it affects land use, development, and environmental decisions. If you live near a proposed mine, wind farm, pipeline, or highway, the honor of the Crown is part of the process that determines whether the project goes ahead, how long approvals take, what conditions are imposed, and how environmental impacts are mitigated. This isn't a special favor to Indigenous peoples. It's a constitutional requirement that should ensure decisions are made responsibly and with proper consultation. Ordinary Canadians benefit from the higher standard of accountability. Thirdly, it protects the legitimacy of the Canadian state. Canada's authority over land, resource, and governance rests partially on treaties, constitutional promises, and historic commitments. The honor of the Crown is what ensures those commitments are not treated as optional. When the Crown acts dishonorably, it undermines trust in government, the rule of law, and national unity. When it acts honorably, it strengthens the legitimacy of the state for everyone. Fourthly, it promotes reconciliation and social stability. A society where Indigenous peoples are treated with respect and fairness is a society with fewer conflicts, fewer court battles, more predictable governance, and healthier relationships between communities. That stability benefits every Canadian, economically, socially, and morally. Fifthly, it influences your tax dollars. When governments fail to act honorably, courts can be called upon to intervene. That often leads to costly litigation, compensation awards, project delays, and renegotiated agreements. Acting honorably from the start reduces such waste and improves public spending. Number 6, it sets a higher ethical bar for public institutions. The honor of the Crown requires governments to consult meaningfully, keep promises, interpret treaties fairly, avoid sharp dealing, and act with integrity. These standards spill over into the broader public service. They influence how bureaucrats, regulators, and ministers are supposed to operate in all areas, not just Indigenous affairs. Finally, it shapes the moral identity of Canada. Many Canadians see reconciliation as part of what it means to be Canadian. The honor of the Crown is the legal backbone for that moral principle. It's the principle that says Canada must be better than its history. We Canadians need to act honorably now. That affects how Canadians understand ourselves and our country. For anyone who cares deeply about justice, Indigenous rights, and the ethical obligations of the state, the honor of the Crown is not just a legal doctrine. It's a lens for understanding why certain government decisions unfold the way they do, why consultation processes matter, why treaty rights are not special rights but constitutional obligations, and why reconciliation is not optional. It's also a reminder that ordinary Canadians have a role supporting policies, leaders, and community efforts that align with honorable and ethical governance, and that when government fails to act honorably and ethically, Canadian citizens have a duty to hold their politicians' feet to the fire. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting or informational, please share it with others and talk about it.